Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I am once again delighted to be joined by Jim Orr. Welcome back, Jim.
Thanks for asking me back, Paul.
You will always be welcome back.
Okay.
Now, last week, obviously, we had a very good discussion to such a degree that your camera packed in, so hopefully we won't have the same issue this time round, Jim. There's been loads happening, but this morning, when I came in, I was having a wee look at the Celtic Christmas advert. Now, you're a guy, you're a playwright, you create things, you put them on stage. What did you make of the advert this morning?
Oh, it's a bit cheesy again, is it not? It's difficult to tell. I mean, they're trying to market their goods, and it's very colourful, etc. I mean, I don't think you take these things all that seriously. So, yeah.
It's a big thing in the calendar for the media team, that they put all that together. It's turned into a big deal for them, which is great because obviously I'm pretty sure did they not win an award at some point for their Christmas ad campaign? There's a point to this.
I think it depends on your expectations. What you're looking for in a Christmas ad. I suppose in the greater scheme of things, you're not that bothered. I think there's more important things to be.
Well, this is the reason I'm bringing it up, because I think that what you're looking for, right? What I'm looking for is a message. I'm looking for a message, Jim. So moving on from what we've just discussed, what we've decided to do at Celtic State of Mind, and what we're going to do, is not a Christmas advert as such, but on the 19th and the 20th of December, which is obviously a massive weekend for Celtic as a club and for fans, we're potentially going to wrap up, Jim, 4 trebles in a row. Now, we were talking about it before, and someone said to me, is it a Scottish record? Now, I believe it's a world record. 12 domestic trophies in a row.
Right,
in terms of quadruple trebles, I think it's a world record. Someone out there might be able to correct me if I'm wrong. So, we've got to do something big on that weekend. Now, there's a few things happening in December on a personal level, but obviously we've got Christmas coming up. And it has been, an end to the hardest year many of us will ever face. So we thought, let's put something back. So we're going to do, over that weekend, 24 hours of broadcasts. And we're going to do 12 hours on the 19th and 12 hours on the 20th. And on the 20th, of course, we'll be covering the game, right? So hopefully after that, everybody will be in a tremendous mood and we can all enjoy it together. We can all celebrate a great achievement together.
Just to clarify, it's not me that's doing the whole 24 hours after some of the comments last week. Good-natured comments where they were. So I'm not doing the whole 24 hours. You
will be appearing at some point, Jim. But we're going to be doing 2 12-hour broadcasts over the weekend, and it's to raise funds for charity, to aid the most vulnerable people in society this year. And although the charities specifically are to be confirmed, we have quite a few in mind. They will be including charities that support mental health, the homeless, vulnerable children and vulnerable adults. We don't want any kids to be waking up on Christmas morning, Jim, without anything under the Christmas tree. So we're going to be raising as much cash as we possibly can over a 24-hour period over a weekend. Now, this year, Jim, every bit of content that a Celtic State of Mind has done, and it's been daily, has been free, and we're going to be asking our listeners and sponsors to get involved by giving us something back over those 24 hours. We do have some big plans that will include ex-players getting involved, pundits, prominent fans, musicians, and it'll be 12 hours non-stop coverage on the Saturday and on the Sunday. And hopefully after the game, everybody will be in a good mood. We're going to raise as much cash as we can. We're going to announce our target at a later date, Jim. But that's our big announcement today. Weekend of the 19th and the 20th. We're going to be on your screens from 8 in the morning until 8 in the evening, raising funds for charities. So if you have a small community-based charity that you think would benefit from some much-needed funds around the Christmas time, please get in touch and we will discuss how we can set that up. So, Jim, I love the Christmas adverts. I think it's a bit of fun. But as I said before, I think there needs to be a message. And our message is, after this year of all years, let's try and support the vulnerable and those in need at that time of the year. So, are you up for getting involved in that? Because I just broke that to you about 5 minutes ago.
Of course, yeah. I mean, last week there was quite a few good-natured comments about how long I tend to talk, so I shall ignore that. Just keep talking away.
You've got to ignore it because we've got 24 hours. We've got 24 hours.
So I could do 23 and a half for them, but we need somebody else for that other half there. So, but thanks for the good-natured comments last week. Some of them were very funny. I broke the internet apparently, but it's back on now, so that's good. You
broke the internet, but basically over the years, Jim, right? And someone the other day there, or the other week, criticised us for name dropping. But you know what? What happens when you're getting involved in books and like yourself with theatres and you're trying to put things together in terms of podcasts, live events, is you get to know a lot of people who have been involved with the club in a playing sense, or maybe they've written books, or maybe a pundit, a prominent fan. So we're going to go through all the phone books that we've managed to accumulate all these contacts, and we're going to get as many people involved as possible. We're going to have a few of the pundits who come in on a weekday basis for Axon Bulletins to present our slots, and we're going to have some other video footage. There'll be loads of giveaways, loads of prizes, loads of charity fundraising, let's hope. So we've got a few figures in mind, and I'm pretty sure the Celtic fans will club together to give back to community charity. So I'm really looking forward to that. There'll be loads of planning towards that. Now, there was a bit of a story I read this morning, Jim, in relation to Karamoko Dembele. And Karamoko Dembele has been named in FIFA 21's Hidden Gems list. Now, I remember back in the day where I used to read the old 442 magazines, and they ran a brilliant feature called The Boys A Bit Special, and they would talk about a player from anywhere in world football who was potentially going to make it big. Mm-hmm. And I remember reading some of the names did make it, some of them didn't. You then think back to the days playing Championship Manager and some of the players that looked brilliant in their teenage years, like Neil Lamptey, always performed well if you signed him. But Dembele, this is the real deal. He's been named in the Hidden Gems list. First and foremost, what's your thoughts on his development? And the question is, should he return to the fold? Because he's been out the squad for some time now.
No, I don't think he should return to the fold. I think, like I said in the previous week, that 10 smothers everything. So where's he going to get the opportunity? I've said also in previous weeks whether you can actually justify having Lennoxtown and the Youth Academy there. How many players actually do come through, and is it worth the money? Now, I suppose if you get something like Kieran Tierney, you get £25 million from him, and that kind of pays for itself. But in terms of young players coming through, I think it's really, really difficult. There's no reserve league, so you're either on the first team or you're not, and there's a bundle of players that are ahead of Karamoko in the queue. And it's just one of these really unfortunate things. I think we talked in previous podcasts about, would you want to put him out on loan? Not really. Not if he was going into the, another Premier Division team or a Championship team, because they end up being kicked off the park. So I think it's a really difficult one for Dembele, really difficult.
I did think that myself, because in the past we've spoken about the amount of players we tend to loan out, and a big part of that, Jim, really is the fact that there's a lack of reserve league, and it's all about trying to get games, so you're sending players out to get games, and there's guys out there at the moment who are on loan from the kind of younger age groups at Celtic. Sometimes it works. You bring back McGregor, he stars and still stars for the team. Ayer was loaned out to Kilmarnock, Christie to Aberdeen. These are some of the obvious ones. Even Rogic was loaned out earlier on to an Australian side to try and get into the squad for the World Cup.
I think it's really important, if you're going to loan someone out, that they're playing at a standard that's actually going to benefit them. I could see guys maybe...
Could he play in the Premier League? Could a Premier League take him, do you think, Dembele?
I'd be concerned about him getting hurt in other teams. I think it's easier maybe to loan out a kind of guy in the back four, where even down to the Championship as well, it's a bit more physical, a bit more rough and tumble, and that would can maybe help to develop some of the guys at the back in terms of tackling, etc. He's quite a small guy as well, maybe a bit of a target. I just have lots of concerns about him, and he's meant to be the next big thing. It'd be great if we could play him. And I think, getting back to the 10 again, I think any other season, the fact he played last season or the season before, I'm losing track.
He played last season. He played in Europe last season. He's the youngest ever Celtic player to play in Europe.
The game he came, was it Hearts he came on?
Came on against Hearts, yeah.
And that was last season, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So
he made his debut at 16.
We're well ahead in the league, and I think if you go well ahead in the league, then you can afford to bring in younger players. Next week, League Cup game, ideal. I'd certainly bring him back for that. I'd certainly populate most of the teams with the fringe players next week. So certainly you can bring him in. I think that, again, as I've said before, that because every game is a virtual cup final, I don't think Neil Lennon can take risks on players that he's not confident that can do it. How can you show you can do it? Well, you have to play games, and it's difficult to bring them in. And that's why, again, repeating myself again, that this game against Sparta next week, I'd be playing in that. There's a game where you can maybe see what he's like, him and Turnbull and Sorrow. Those are the games to play him to play. I don't think we'll learn anything by playing him against Ross County next Saturday, Sunday.
This is the game that we're getting for the added value on the season ticket.
Well, that's a whole different discussion, isn't it? So don't go there. But yeah, I would certainly play him this Thursday at Sparta, yeah. Because as I've said before on the podcast, that I would leave a few of our key players behind, because it's more important to play league games than the European games. And let's see what the fringe players can do in a game like that, because I think playing a League Cup game isn't maybe going to test them that much. Albeit we're playing Ross County, who are another top tier team, so it should be a test for them. But
well, I think he comes into the category, obviously, of players, Jim, who it seems we don't want to risk them when we're going for every single point. We're in a situation at the moment where we really can't afford to drop any points in the league. So I take that. I absolutely do take that on board. There's a few other players, I think, who are in the same category at the moment, who won't be risked for that reason. And I did suggest, I think it was last week, that the games that I would far more likely play some of these fringe players in would be more your League Cup games. Now, again, and I've said this from the beginning of the season, as a Celtic supporter, and it's not an entitlement, I want Celtic to win every tournament, because I think we've set a standard. So I'm not saying, right, forget about the League Cup this season, Jim, play the young kids, play the fringe players. I'm not saying that. But there needs to come a time where they get a game, and it won't be in the league, because we are now obviously 9 points behind, 2 games in hand, of course, and every point's a prisoner.
In terms of that point, I mean, you can't have your cake and eat it. Basically, you can't on the one hand say give the kid games, on the other hand say, well, these games are too important to play them. So would it be that big a deal if they knocked out the League Cup? I don't think it would be, but given the nature of Celtic, it would be a big deal.
Yes.
So you pay your money, you take your choice. If it's all about trying to give younger guys a game to see if they can then play in the first team in league games, that's what the League Cup's about. Maybe playing Ross County, maybe because they're in the top tier, maybe not. Maybe if we're playing Clyde or somebody else in a lower league, maybe that's an easier game to play. But you can't have your cake and eat it. Either you say, we're going to throw these young guys in to give them experience so we can then play them in the league games, or you don't. But as I said, you can't have both.
There's been a few games, though, when you're looking at it, in terms of games where we've been fairly comfortable this season. There's been a few, not that many, where we've obviously been beaten Hamilton, Ross County and Hibernian fairly comfortably, Jim. And you've got 9 subs on the bench, and you think to yourself, why not give the likes of Dembele 20 or 30 minutes now? I know he's no longer on the bench. He's not in the top 20 players at the club at this moment in time who are able to be in that first team.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, and I've said that before in terms of I've got 5 subs to use. We're not using the 5 subs, I think, to the maximum, and we should be getting them on earlier. I also, it'd be good to start some of these fringe players. You know, it's one thing starting a game, it's another thing being a sub and trying to get into the flow of the game. And I always feel really kind of sorry for players who come on in the last 10-15 minutes. What can you do in the last 10-15 minutes? And that's why I feel really sorry for Lee Griffiths in the last few weeks, both for club and country. You having to come on in the last 15-20 minutes and do something. It's a lot of pressure on you. Whereas if you're starting a game, you've got potentially the whole game in front of you to do something. So it'd be good to start these guys, because I think that makes a world of difference. Because, you know, only getting 15-20 minutes, you may not give any touches of the ball, the game might pass you by. I don't think that's a good indication of what you can do. I think if you're running from the start and saying, on you go, David Turnbull, you've got 90 minutes to dig out, it shows what you can do, rather than compressing it into 10-15 minutes. And I think, again, that's your balancing act. And that's why I think the League Cup game next week and the European game, stick Sorrow in, Patrick Klimala in, Dembele in, Turnbull in.
Even in the European games?
Oh, aye.
Yeah,
definitely.
You've mentioned that yourself.
How are you going to test these guys? How are you going to test these guys unless you put them in against decent teams?
I think the problem with the European stage at the moment, and I think it's almost been written off by even Neil Lennon, most fans are resigned to the fact that it would take a monumental set of results for us to actually qualify, Jim. So, you know, it's not something like we're deluded and we think we can pull it back. But
it's
Celtic...
also the fact, Paul, if you've got a squad of 28, the theory is that you should be confident enough to play any of those 28 players at any point in time. And we're not doing that. And I'm not saying that you put out, you know, a complete unknown team against Sparta, but, maybe don't play Eddie, don't play Griff, don't play Brown, don't play Carmack, don't play Christie, whatever. So maybe you're playing 5 or 6 of the normal guys, plus your fringe guys.
Your fringe players.
And you should be confident. If you can't be confident playing these guys, then why are they in the squad, in the first place? Because basically what you should be doing, as any football manager should be doing, you should be trying to have the best squad possible. And every player you've got should be trying to buy a better player than that player. And that should be an ongoing process.
Mm-hmm.
And from the chief executive point of view, you should be trying to have the best manager possible. And without going into that debate just now, is the manager just now the best we could get? No, he isn't, so we could get somebody better. Are the 11 best players we've got the best we get? No, we could get better players than them as well. So you should be constantly looking to replace players you've got with better players. We've got a squad of 28. Would you trust all those 28 players? Chances are you wouldn't. Are they good players? Of course they're good players. They've got as far as they've got. But when we name people like Anthony Ralston, I don't like picking Anthony Ralston, there's a kind of sigh that, I don't know about playing him. Welsh, I don't know about playing him. Sorrow, well, he's not played a game yet. You start getting into this, do you really want to do this? And I think if you've got a squad of players, they should all be ready, at a moment's notice to come in and do a job. And I think also it's really, really difficult for players if you're not playing games.
Of course.
You've played football yourself, that your whole week is geared towards playing a game of football. And if you're a sub, I suppose particularly these days when there's no fans in the ground, you're sitting in the stand on your own, and it's understandable you might check your phone now and again. I think it's just really, really difficult. And mentally you have to be really, really tough. And what was interesting about the Christmas video was the end. What happened at the end?
David Turnbull sitting on his own, and Scott Brown says something like, come on. That was quite interesting. Wasn't it? That was quite interesting. I know, the forgotten man.
Aye, so why would you put that in your Christmas video? That seems totally bizarre. Just remembered that there.
Yeah, it was a bit unusual.
If you're David Turnbull and you're meant to be, we talked about Dembele being one of the stars of the future. He's meant to be one of the stars of the Scottish game. Young guy, desperate to play football, isn't getting a kick of the ball. Understandably so, because of the 10. But at some point he has to get a game, and I think Europe and I think the League Cup, give him a game. And if he goes out there and he has a fantastic game, then you're confident you can put him in. Then you're confident. At the moment, I can understand where Neil Lennon's coming from, because as you said a minute ago, every point's a prisoner. And if you're Neil Lennon, the next game that comes up, you're maybe thinking to yourself, this actually might be my last Celtic game. This might be the last game I'm in charge of Celtic, or been involved in football at all. That brings loads of pressure on you. So you want the guys on the pitch who you can trust, who've got the evidence that have done it before. And although you might think Sorrell, Turnbull, etc. are good players, can you really trust them? Can you really put Sorrell in instead of Scott Brown? Of course you can't.
Not at the moment you can't.
So then you can't really complain that Sorrell not getting the game. It's just, it is what it is. But if we suddenly manage to, start putting points on the board, and the other teams start to drop points, and we find ourselves, maybe 9 points ahead, that would be great. Then you're maybe taking the risk of playing a Sorrell from the start, or a Turnbull from the start. I just think it's really difficult, both from the club's point of view, from the manager's point of view, and from the actual players themselves. The
big thing, or the issue that I have, or the counter-argument that we can have, Jim, because we're allowed to argue and debate and disagree.
It's called discussion.
Absolutely.
It's argument.
Is the European stage. That is, Celtic's short window. And I've said this a few times. When we play in Europe, there's so much riding, obviously, financially on performance in Europe. But that's also the stage whereby when we're looking for young players to come on, we've got to be able to sell them something. So we know for a fact we're in the top 5 leagues in Europe. Therefore, we're selling them a completely different dream or a completely different ambition. And that is that we're a stepping stone for players like the obvious, Dembele, the original Dembele, that is, Edouard, Van Dijk, Wanyama, etc., whereby we're a platform for them to move to a big club in England or France or wherever it is they end up. And in order to do that, we need to have a carrot, and often that carrot's European football.
Well, I think the carrot's the Champions League. That's the big carrot. And if it's not the Champions League, well, is the Europa League much of a carrot? I'm not so sure it is. Because the Champions League is where, all the kind of big teams are playing, where the big money is, where all the focus is. I think the Europa League is a very kind of distant cousin of the Champions League. And I've said before, in any other season, I'd much rather we did well in Europe than at home. Much rather we did when we some sort of run the Champions League. Those are the exciting nights. You're pitching yourself against teams who are better than you. In Scotland, we are pitching ourselves against teams that are not as good as you, albeit the league doesn't show that at the moment. So I'd much rather be in that big boys' playground with the bigger teams in any other season. And I think, again, that if we're saying that the 10 is the main thing, then anything that distracts from the 10 is a bad thing for me. And that's where Europe were out. I think if we'd have won the first few games and we were in a good position to qualify, fair enough. But we get embarrassed last game out, we lost the first game at home. It's extremely unlikely that we're going to qualify for this. So this is actually an opportunity then to do what you said a minute ago, but giving other guys a game. And
give youth a chance.
Give youth a chance. Give the kids a game. And then we regroup for next year, hopefully. And hopefully we win the league and hopefully win the Champions League next year. We make a real go of it next year, because the 10 thing is then in the past. Whether we get the 10 or, heaven forbid, we don't get the 10, it's in the past. So it's not such a big deal.
Well, let's hope we do, Jim. I mean, that's obviously the focus and the main focus, but it made me wonder on a few of the points you've made earlier on in relation to Celtic's youth development and the process of introducing young players into the first team. Can be a difficult one at a club like Celtic, but obviously, we come from the great traditions of producing players, Jim, and again, it's the modern game and it's different. But what I did find interesting the other night is I was watching a Scotland game, as it happens, and I set out a tweet that got a fair bit of traction, but had I tried to explain the reason behind it, because apparently you've got to have a point. If I tweet something, Jim, I've got to explain what my point is, and that I was challenged time and time again, and I decided I would just discuss it.
Who says you have to?
Various people, because my tweet was that basically around a very simple fact everybody knows, that Andy Robertson, Declan Gallagher and Stephen O'Donnell, who were starring for Scotland's most successful international side in 22 years, that can't be denied. I'm not saying they're the best, but they're the most successful because they've qualified. Yeah. Between 2009 and 2011, all three players were released from Celtic without playing a first team game. That's all I said. Straight away, I'm being accused of saying that Celtic's youth policy isn't good enough. Would Gallagher get a game for Celtic? You're trying to say O'Donnell would get... No, I'm not trying to say any of that. So it's a multi-layered kind of point that I was making. You could say, well, am I looking at the fact that the players have overcome adversity early in their career, Jim, and proved everybody wrong and made the grade to an international level, right, which is one of the highest levels you could ever attain other than Champions League status, which Andy Robertson has also attained? Or could you look at it and say that the youth development system at Celtic is so good that they're producing players that can play at international level? Or could you look at it and say, should we not be producing players for Celtic? Is it in the business plan? Because this was one of the arguments. It's brilliant that Celtic produce all these players that go and play elsewhere. Actually, it's not. Because I don't think that's in the business plan of the millions of pounds that we pump into youth development, that we're just going to produce all these players for other clubs. So, no, I'm not saying that O'Donnell and Gallagher would get a game for Celtic. I am saying that it's fantastic that all three players have proved the coach wrong or the head of development wrong, who released them. I think that's great, particularly the story of Robertson, which is well known. But what I would question is, are we producing enough young players from our youth development into the first team? And I think it's a fair enough question.
Knows the obvious answer to that one, because we haven't brought many through. So the ones we've brought through, Kieran Tierney, Callum McGregor, James Forrest. And Callum McGregor and Kieran Tierney were given a chance under Ronnie Dyler. So he was at least somebody who's willing to throw younger kids in.
And by the way, the Tierney thing, sorry to interject, and you did say a great point earlier. You produce what was an Aidan McGeady or a Sean Maloney, you sell them for big money, fine, keeps the thing ticking over, you're basically washing your face there. You sell Kieran Tierney for 25 million, you say, well, he was a product of the youth development, fantastic. Kieran Tierney was very close to being released from Celtic, very close.
Well, the main point I was going to make is actually who actually judges. How do you tell? How do you differentiate between one player and another? I mean, it could be a squad you've got with 2 or 3 left backs in it, and you have to pick one left back, or do you have to pick one left back? I'm fascinated by how these things work, and it's dead easy in hindsight to say, well, there's 3 guys we could have had, but what were they like? I know. The best part of 10 years ago. Were they as good as, not as good as they are just now, but were they as good as other players in that particular team? What is it you're looking for? And that's why I, from time to time think, is there a need for youth development? Because we get hammered by that Sparta Prague team, and that was our second team, and they can't be on the kind of money the Celtic players are on. You could go out there and buy half the Sparta Prague team and don't pay them much money, and all of a sudden you've got better players. So I'm not so sure about the whole kind of having a youth development scheme at all. I don't know enough about how players get picked and what the criteria is that they get picked. And because it's so competitive that I've been involved in the past, kids football obviously, like trying to pick teams for a select team. And what you're then getting is all the kind of good kids from different schools coming along, and you're trying to decide which are the better kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really difficult, and trying to figure out who's better than whom. And one of the things I ended up doing is actually find out what boys' club they played for. And if some were playing for boys' clubs, like Celtic Boys Club, and some weren't, I'd tend to go for the boys' club kids, because that's the only way I could figure out how you could. Not that they weren't good players, and that's my kind of thinking, that I don't believe that people looked at the players you mentioned and said that they're not good players, but they're just not good enough compared to these other guys that are there at the same time. And hindsight's a great thing. You can always look back and say we could have got, and last week it was all about we could have signed Declan Gallagher, signed David Marshall. We could have had these younger guys in our squad without paying anything out. I just think it's so subjective, a lot of this stuff, and it's so difficult.
Fine margins,
so
Jim.
Competitive.
Yep.
And it's actually maybe one person doing one thing in one game that makes you think, oh yeah, he's a player because he's done that. And maybe these other players couldn't do that particular thing. And if you know somebody can do something, you think, well, I could shape that, I could mould that, I could make that something. But because it's, as you say, it's fine margins, and you've got, one would imagine at Lennoxton, we've got the best of the best. You've got the best of the best. And what you'll find then, which I found through experience myself, is that the parents of these kids are used to their kids being the best players in their team. And they find it difficult to get their head round that, why is he a sub? Because he's the best. Well, he's not the best of the best here.
No.
He might have been the best in his boys' club or his school team, but he's not the best of the best here. And all of a sudden they have to come up against better players, and all of a sudden they're sub. And how can they cope with that? And if I have no idea how many young kids we've got at Lennoxtown, but it's loads at all the different age groups. So how do you decide? And I'm assuming that there's some, objective process that works their way through the players. And if they released the three players you mentioned, obviously I would like to think that they didn't quite come up to the levels that other people come up to.
Of course, and this is one of the points that's right. Oh, you're trying to say they were wrong to release them. Actually, at that point, no, I'm not trying to say that. They were obviously not good enough at that time. And then people think that, you've got this one-dimensional view. I'll go back to the Quality Street gang, a subject that I researched for years. And what I established through speaking to the players who were involved in that is that we had players that weren't signed, that left, went elsewhere and became a success. Now, Jim Holton was one of them, right? Isaac Blue, 6'2". Jim Holton's after you, right? Yep. Jimmy O'Rourke, who went on to
Hibs.
become an absolute legend at Easter Road. And Graham Souness. Graham Souness was in at Celtic Park at the same time as Kenny Dalglish on a Tuesday and a Thursday night. Now, I remember saying, and this is me name dropping again, maybe we'll get Kenny in for the charity weekend. I remember saying to Kenny Dalglish, I can't imagine a midfield of Graham Souness and Bobby Murdoch. And Kenny said, no, doesn't work like that. So I'm well aware that player at that time wasn't right for Celtic, or Celtic weren't right for them. Totally aware of that. But if you're running a business, right, do you honestly think anyone's looking at that Scotland squad, right, and saying, oh, isn't it great that we produced A3 players? No. What they'd much rather is either we've produced them for the good of Celtic, either financially or on the park.
The question that you posed was about young Dembele. Now, we've all seen the video clips of Karamoko since he was about 13 or 14.
Yeah.
So you would have to be deaf, dumb and blind not to know that he's a future star. So if you let him go, you would say something's badly wrong here. But of the other players that you mentioned, I don't think there'd been much between other players. Andy Robertson was quite a wee guy, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Still is obviously a wee guy. The other guys you mentioned, Gallagher and O'Donnell, defenders. So how do you differentiate between 10 defenders you've got? Who do you keep? Who do you let go? I think it's a really difficult thing. I wouldn't do the hindsight game to say, well, we should have kept these guys going.
You can't possibly do it.
Do that.
What I would say is, when was the last time we produced a right back and a centre half? I certainly would throw that into the mix.
Oh, and I think also from my experience as well, people tend to be obsessed with big players in Scotland, and So if you're not big and strong, particularly kind of under 12, under 13 type of thing, you tend to get missed out a wee bit. I think from a strategic point of view, again, one would hope that's what we're doing. We're just punters saying that we would assume that there's some strategy here in terms of the players we're trying to identify, the players we're trying to bring through, we're trying to develop, we're trying to shape that. We know that we've got this kid here who's under 15 just now, who plays centre forward. In 5 years' time, he'll be our centre forward in 5 years' time. And we'll do everything we can to make sure that happens. I don't know. I don't know what happens up there. You'd like to think there is some plan towards it, and that's why
there's a massive plan. There's a massive analysis.
That's why I think
involved.
that's really, really difficult, and that's why, do you want to do that, or do you want to go and sign the Sparta Prague guy that scored a hat-trick the other week, and you can sign him for £1 million and pay him £5,000 a week?
But then perhaps when you're looking at the way that things aren't actually progressing in Europe for Celtic, maybe we should have a different take on it. And I don't mean base everything on the youth. I'm not saying that for a second.
I think it's a different discussion you're now having in terms of how those players are developed and how those players are shaped in terms of technique, etc. And one again, you don't know the answer to this. You're assuming that how they're developing the kids, how they're shaping the kids, is the same as what they're doing in other countries. So is something different happening in Sparta Prague that's happening in Leonardstown? You like to think it wasn't. You like to think that there's a kind of standard way of developing players. Maybe there's not. And how come I always kind of think, I said last week I'm a big fan of Scotland, but when Scotland play teams, usually, the other countries, their technique always looks better. They look more athletic than we do. So I don't know if that's a trick of the eye, or it's a factual thing. It's a very subjective thing that I see. And even from a Celtic point of view, quite a lot of the time we're playing European games and you think they seem so much tactically more tuned in than us. They look physically fitter than us. I don't mean this particular Celtic team, I mean in general terms in the past.
Well,
there's been certain Celtic teams like Martin O'Neill's team, big, strong, they're not going to get messed about. But in general terms, I think the European opposition tend to be a bit tactically better, physically better.
Talking to the physicality aspect to that then, when you're looking at two players that obviously we've seen a hell of a lot of in Andy Robertson, of course, when he was at Dundee United, and Kieran Tierney at Celtic. Since they've gone down to England, have you noticed a change in their physical stature?
Absolutely.
Kieran Tierney looks like a monster.
Aye, absolutely. And then that's you posing a question of how our players been trained, developed, their physique, etc. And obviously Arsenal have got 1,000 coaches down there.
Got a wee story for you, Jim. A wee story. I've never shared it on the podcast, but it's quite an interesting one.
Controversial.
Right? No, it seems a bit far-fetched actually, but it did happen. I've got the emails to prove it.
I'll fluff the cushion up.
Again, I'm talking about the Quality Street gang a hell of a lot today, but anyway, Vic Davidson obviously was a part of the Quality Street gang, and if anybody's been following his career, he moved away to the States and he played in the NASL and he played the indoor stuff, and he stayed over there, met a woman, settled down, became a coach, and he's been coaching kids over there until he's retired, I think last year. Anyway, a couple of years ago, Vic Davidson and I stayed in touch after the book, and he sent me video footage of this kid that he discovered over in the States. He just said, I've never seen a player like him. He's unbelievable. And he started sending me goals. Every week he's sending me these goals. And he basically says to me, is there any way we can get him a trial at Celtic? And I'm like, how am I going to get a trial?
You know people.
How am I going to do that? But actually I thought, I'll take that as a challenge. I love a challenge, right? So I take that as a challenge. And I spoke to a gentleman that I know who's involved with the club and who's obviously in talking terms with all the big high-hegians, as I think we can call them. And I started the discussion with this person because they knew Vic from back in the day when they both played. And they actually organised for young Carlos Franco. Now that sounds like a drug baron, but it was the guy's name, to come over to Celtic Park for 2 weeks for a trial. So obviously the club flew him over from the States to Celtic, gave him a trial. He played in 2 games, I believe, maybe 3, I'd need to check. But one of the friendlies that he played in was against Clyde's first team when Barry Ferguson was in charge. And he performed pretty well, but obviously we're looking at it from the biased eyes of hoping that this thing happens, because I think I'd have been his agent after that. And he played well and all the rest of it. But the reason I'm bringing this up, he was allowed to go home and that was the end of it. He had a trial and that was the end of it. Mm-hmm. Got a wee picture of him in the Celtic strip as well, when they were playing Clyde. So the point I'm making is that the amount of stats, Jim, that was available so that feedback could be given to the kid, because he came over himself. He didn't come over with his parents or anything. He came over himself. I think he was 17 at the time. was unbelievable. The amount of analysis, and that was both in the training sense and also in the games scenario. So, I mean, obviously it's all computer-based and you can get your printouts, and it's almost like a report of your trial period of 2 weeks. Take it away because it's not working at Celtic, but take this away with you. It might work elsewhere. So we did try to get them trials for Dunfermline and St Johnstone, but there was an issue with the cost associated with flying the kid over from America, which Celtic actually paid for all of that, obviously, put him up in a hotel and everything, but other clubs weren't able to do it. But it did show me, it gave me a wee insight into the lengths of analysis that they went to at that level. And he was playing in the team with Jack Aitchison.
So you must assume that's the analysis that's getting done for every single player at Lennoxton.
Every day of the week, absolutely.
So if you're having to make a decision on 2 players, that's your objective data.
Yep.
So, you know, and if you've got loads of players, then there's going to be loads of casualties. So that's why I wouldn't certainly blame anyone for letting people slip through the net. I think it's just the nature of football. It's so competitive. So what's the guy doing now? Where is he now?
I'm not in touch with him, although he is on my Twitter. I've got his email and I've got his phone number.
How old is he now? Is that 19 or
Well, Jack Aitchison would have been maybe 17 at that time as well. So a few years ago now. I've got the emails there on my phone, I'll just check. But the interesting thing is, the question was, are we producing enough players? You don't think we are. It was 2017, May 2017, I've just checked that. That's when he was over.
I don't think we have, and I think part of that's to do with the 10 again. I think if we get into a season where, obviously it's a season like no other, but if we get into a season where there's not so much pressure for whatever reason, then it'd be good to give a lot of younger guys. There's nothing better than you have a young player coming through. There's nothing better than Charlie Nicholas broke through, because from a fan's point of view, you want a kind of local or a young player from the youth team coming through.
It's from the terrace into the pitch thing, isn't it?
And a forward as well, somebody that scores goals, that kind of glamour.
And with that hair.
So it's no big thing to...
And the gear, and the no socks, everything was right about Charlie.
So it's no big deal if you get a big centre-half coming through, or maybe a full-back coming through, but getting a kind of goal scorer coming through is dead exciting. There's nothing better than that. And we haven't done that for a while, and maybe Jack Aitchison looked as if he might have been the one then, but he's away to where? Fleetwood, is it? He's gone. He went to Fleetwood on loan, was it? He spent times at Forest Green. Sorry, yeah. He spent a loan period at Forest Green, but he got a full permanent move in the summer there, so he's gone as well. But he was playing in that team, as was Kelleher and a few others whose names will come back to me. But I was very impressed at the level of analysis. But I do recall that the immortal words we've got, he's not as good as the players we've already got. And that will always be the acid test. And that was the final line on it. Because you can't... I don't think you can bring subjectivity into this stuff. Mm-hmm. And if they have that level of analysis, then that's great. That's what they should have. And that's kind of reassuring that they have that. And maybe that's something that... I don't mean sharing individual players, but actually to share that with the fans. You talked about the Christmas advert. I would rather find out that kind of stuff, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of people tune into the podcast, they were completely unaware of maybe that level of detail. And it'd be good to know, because it's an interesting thing. And how many players do Celtic have in their youth setup? I mean the ones that sit under the first team squad, how many are there? Is it 10, 20? What? A massive amount. I don't mean through the age groups, I mean just in terms of the ones that are bubbling under, those kind of guys who might be making the squad next year. Is that 5 people, 10 people, 20 people? They had what was called a development squad. Development squad, sorry. Yeah, development squad. So do you know what that number is? I don't. I would guess 16. I mean, there's a few guys who come into the broadcast on a daily basis who'll be able to confirm that for sure. So they've got 16 who will be on some sort of contract, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year contract. Yeah. Thing. Yep. Playing different positions. I just find it fascinating in terms of how that works. What happens next? Pick one of those players. What happens next in terms of his stats, etc. And at what point do you have to cut him loose, because you've got Ayer at centre half and you're a centre half and you're never going to be as good as Ayer, so you have to go. And that's a bit I said earlier, that because things boil down to money at the end of the day, every football manager should be looking to replace every single player he has with a better player. And it's just money that holds you back in timing. You can't replace a whole team in 5 minutes. You don't have money to replace a whole team. And we were the only time we've done this quite well, I think, was the whole Musa Eddie thing, where we just have to accept the model that we have. We bring in young, hungry players, give them 2 or 3 years, hopefully we can sell them on for a few bob, but we buy the next young, hungry player to replace that young, hungry player 6 months before. And what a treat with Eddie. It's just a shame they didn't play a bit longer together, because they were the kind of dream team up front.
Yeah, they would.
And I think when I look back, people were talking about the sort of 9 in a row with the highlights. I think the game at Ibrox, when Musa sets up Eddie to win 3-2, you're thinking, if only.
I know.
If only that could have stayed there for a few years. But it'd be unrealistic, I think, to expect that to happen. But I just thought we got that right. Dembele in 600, what was it, 5 or something like that.
Yeah.
Couple of years, maybe it would be good if it was 3 years, but hey ho, 2 years, Eddie comes in. We paid a fortune for Eddie, mind you. Then Eddie will go next year. So the next Eddie has to be here now. Is he here now? Is Ayeti the next Eddie? Is Patrick Klamala the next Eddie? Don't know. But every time
I would say no on Klamala. I'd be pretty confident and say he's not.
So you then think, why do you spend £3 million on someone who's not the next person you want to replace? I'm a bit confused with that one.
I guess that's where the youth bit comes in, and it is even more relevant, Jim, because when you're buying a Dembele or an Edouard, I mean, these guys, I'm not going to call them a marquee signing, because fairly, in Eddie's case, fairly unknown to the wider public. Dembele was well known in England, and we got him, even though Spurs had wanted to buy him for about 6 million 6 months beforehand. But a player like Klamala, where there's people might not think it's a high risk, but it's a £3 million player or £3.5 million investment. But he's a project. He's a classic project player, as is Sorrow. And it's at that point that I believe we should be at least able to produce a player as good as Ibu Kouassi or Patrick Klamala or Ismail Osoro. And I'm not writing the two guys off. They're still part of the squad. And it's that kind of level, the project level, that I think, well, with the investment in our youth development, we should be able to produce a player of that standard. I've said it before, when was the last striker we produced? Who was the last striker we produced that scored goals?
And also, in terms of the succession planning of that there's every chance we'll lose Ryan Christie next summer. Every chance we'll lose Callum McGregor next summer. Ellie Nussey's going to go back to his parent club. So one would like to think there's plans. Maybe David Turnbull is the new Ryan Christie in terms of where they play offensive players. Got a bit of dig, got a bit of a shot on them. Who's the new Callum McGregor coming through? Don't know. Who are we going to buy? Don't know.
I was impressed with Robertson. He came in, he played against Cluj, made his debut against Cluj away, played very well, I thought. He was kind of mentored that night.
Played him on Thursday as well, yeah.
Well, yeah. But he was loaned out to Gillingham, so he's getting games with Gillingham.
Is that Robertson?
Yeah.
Is that the boy with the left foot?
Scott Robertson. Aye. I mean, you've got Henderson as well.
Robertson, I was thinking,
you've got Henderson as well.
Henderson?
Yeah, Henderson.
Sorry.
Yep.
Not paying attention.
But Robertson, I mean, he's really impressing with Gillingham as well. A couple of man of the match performances.
Aye. So I think there has to be that succession planning. And I was quite surprised they spent $9 million in Eddie, because that's obviously record transfer fee. If we're on the ball with this, then we should be getting someone in the January window that's going to replace the guy that moves on in the summer. And although we don't like the fact that people use Celtic as a stepping stone, we are where we are with this stuff. And therefore we should be planning to do that. Somebody in 2 or 3 years, move on, big money, and we've got somebody in 6 months before. And we have to get that right. Because as you said there, I think that's what, 5 million plus on 2 players that are hardly getting a sniff of things.
I know.
And maybe Sorrow's the next Scott Brown. When Scott Brown goes. But we'd have to be playing them into that position. You can't suddenly just throw them in at the start of next season, so you're the new Scott Brown. And again, this goes back to it's difficult to do given every point's a prisoner again.
Why do we not have someone who's been honed and trained and coached and has the same mentality or football philosophy because they've been at the club? For example, Daniel Church leaves the club after 13 years, having never played, 21 years of age. They know what Celtic is and how we play and what the mentality and the culture is. Why don't we have a ready-made striker? We never seem to have one. We never seem to have a goalie. Or even a centre-half. And I'm not saying go out and buy Declan Gallagher, but my point stands. Why don't we have a centre-half?
If you have a half-decent centre-forward, that's when you get the money. You know they're playing in Scotland. I mean, goals are the most important things in the game. And if we had a good centre... If we had a modern Charlie Nicholas scoring the goals that Charlie Nicholas scored, both domestically and in Europe and for Scotland, then you could write your own price to get...
Do you think we should try and get Charlie in on the weekend?
Definitely, yeah.
Why not? Stephen Forbes, welcome to the show, Stephen. You're commenting on YouTube, which reminds me that we spoke yesterday about giving away a bottle of booze, which was the gin the Frank McAvenny gin that had been given to us by Simon Donnelly. Simon was on the show on Wednesday. Thank you very much to Simon for giving us this for a prize. But the winner is Scott Giles. Scott Giles, who subscribes to us on YouTube. So unfortunately on YouTube you can't do something as simple as send them a message. So I'll try and find Scott. If you're listening, Scott, get in touch, and obviously we will get that bottle of booze to you as well. We also had someone else asking why just the last 100 subscribers. Well, we're going to have loads of prizes between now and Christmas that will be given out to all of our, or we won't be giving them out to all the subscribers, that will bankrupt me.
Yeah.
But we'll certainly be allowing all subscribers to take part in competitions leading up to Christmas. So well done to Scott. We have a Chris Sutton bottle of gin that will be given away next week. Now, Stephen Forbes states, undoubtedly a raw talent, talking about Dembele, but we have no insight into his attitude and application and training day in, day out.
Good point, yeah.
Who would he realistically replace as things stand? Now, he's a right-sided offensive player. You're looking at the fact that James Forrest was obviously the first choice there, Jim. I felt in the first few games, if you look at the subs, Dembele's sitting there, he is a sub. He is potentially a guy who would come on and replace Forrest due to injury or loss of form or whatever. At that stage, he's in the 20. He wouldn't get anywhere near that now that we've got, obviously, Frimpong sitting in there.
You can't have any passengers in the team, and no disrespect to the boy, you don't know what he's going to be like.
And he can't play the role that we're playing Frimpong, and there's an argument to say Frimpong can't play it either.
You're also talking about, I mean, you now get into the kind of realms we've been talking about previous weeks in terms of how the team plays and the shape of the team and all this kind of stuff, because there's something wrong with the coaching there at the moment. We're not playing as a team, we're playing as lots of individuals. And if individuals turn up, we'll do okay. So you throw another individual in Karamoko Dembele into the mix, then I think you're further complicating things as well. Different if you've got a good structure to the team. You can slot in there, Karamoko, that's what you're going to do. But because it's been so kind of topsy-turvy, that might even just make things more confusing.
So is Karamoko really the Ryan Christie role, right of centre in front of the midfield, just behind the strikers? Is that where we're looking?
Or is he a winger?
Or is he a winger?
Don't know. It's one of these ones where until somebody's played a few games to figure out themselves what the best position is, I think it's a bit of a difficult one, because if you take somebody like Ryan Christie, he's dotted about different positions from time to time, and he's found his niche now. That's where he should play.
Yep.
I think it all comes back to that we can't carry any surplus players this season.
No.
And we need everyone performing every single game. We've talked about certain players who one game's a 9 out of 10, next game's a 2 out of 10. They can't keep doing that because we can't drop any more points. And I think that everything will always come back to, as you said earlier, every point's a prisoner here. And can you risk someone who you really don't know? You're putting them in to give him game time, to help him develop, when in fact, if you're Neil Lennon, your job's on the line here.
Yeah.
And you're going to go with the tried and trusted. And that's totally understandable. And the fallout from that is you can't maybe develop some of the younger players. And I said earlier that if we'd have finished the league last season, we'd have finished it with 5 games to go. We'd have won the league, no bother. And we could have given all these young guys tons of games before the Scottish Cup final. And unfortunately, it didn't work out in that way. And we've not been in a position this year, apart from possibly this League Cup game coming on, because we wanted to do well in Europe. But now Europe's away, I think that's an opportunity now to get some of the fringe guys involved.
It's an interesting viewpoint. Now, Philip Lloyd is commenting on YouTube. If you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. Don't often get the chance to watch real time. Keep the great work up, guys. Well, it's great to have you on board, Philip. And Terry Tibbs says good afternoon. Great to see Jim. Jim, you've got a fan. I know Terry, you got a lot of stick last week, but you do have a fan.
Terry, and who else is on your? Is it Red Scotland as well?
Yes, Red Scotland, and follow our Celtic. Good afternoon. Mark is in
Thanks
the room.
for the comments last week, guys. Much appreciated. The other thing to note is I actually can't see the comments. Only Paul can see them, because I noticed somebody say something to Stevie the other day. Asked Stevie something, but obviously Stevie was sitting here, so he can't see the comments.
I know.
So
and by the way, I don't ignore anybody's comments. It's just that there are so many because they all filter in from all the social media channels, Jim. And you've got to keep scrolling through them.
I'm not blaming you, Paul.
So
people were blaming you last week.
Multitasking.
Not enough comments. I'm not blaming you for a second. I think you do a grand job.
What was I being blamed for last week? Was that because your camera went off?
Because I was talking too much and you weren't talking enough, and there wasn't enough comments. Because the people have spoken, not the people.
The people have spoken. Helen McCallum. I loved the Christmas ad. We are all the little boy when he says he's missing Celtic. I think we are. We're all missing the routine that we've known for decades. I said the other day, Jim, I've watched Celtic in 5 different decades. How many have you?
I think it's also good to see the players, just having a bit of fun doing things. Of
course it is.
That's always great to see. I think the point you were making is maybe the kind of the message at Christmas maybe shouldn't just be about trying to shift merchandise. It's maybe something else. Then again, the Celtic Foundation do great things as well.
Of course they do. Yeah, so we can't ignore that, and we're not competing with anybody because it's all about actually helping the vulnerable. So Absolutely. It doesn't matter how that happens or who it goes through, as long as they're helped. Damien Gallagher, you don't have to apologise for mentioning another podcast on here. Damien says, have a listen to the 20-minute Tim's podcast on Academy Sports Science. It's quite illuminating. Someone else mentioned this other day. I've not got round to listening to it yet, Jim. Okay. But I have absolutely no issue with any other Celtic podcast. Why would we? We're all providing content for Celtic fans. There's not an issue. And obviously we had the 4 Tims guys dialing in last week. And when things settle down, it'd be good to get the 20-minute boys in here as well. Quite happy for them to come into the studio when we're allowed, with travelling restrictions and all that have been removed. We'll certainly get them in, which would be tremendous.
I think that's a good thing about internet, social media, that we now know a lot more than we did 30, 40 years ago about certain things. Mm-hmm. And people are then sharing that. I mean, if you go back 40, 50 years, people depended on the Daily Record to find out what was happening. So things like, obviously there wasn't sports science back then possible, but in terms of, even back in the day, how did the big clubs decide on what players to keep on? What was their criteria? Obviously it was non-analytical, it was mostly subjective. And we have all this objective decision, which is fascinating. And I'm a bit too old for your championship managers and your PS5 and stuff like that, but speaking to my kids who played that, the amount of data they've got in players there is phenomenal. So one assumes that that's also available to most of the clubs to make decisions.
Well, one of the big things, and I think Red Scotland's made a good point here, there's no excuse for our players not developing physically similar to the English base. Now, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Because that isn't that what the academy is? It's not just about the game of football, it's about mentality, but also physicality. So they look at diet, they look at the science around fitness. To the point, to the nth degree, like I said, I got a tiny insight with Carlos coming over.
Well, I think all the players have got their own individual programmes to adhere to. Again, I think I'd find it quite interesting to see. It's one thing to see you've got a programme, maybe the targets that have been set, and that's why I made the comparison. Is do we have the same sort of development programme as they have in some other team in Europe? What are their targets? If you're trying to develop somebody's muscle mass, whatever, is there a kind of standard thing that you aim for? Is there an optimum for a football player to have that? Is there an optimum for a forward to have or a winger to have? So you start to delve into all those kind of stuff, and you think it's fascinating stuff in terms of how that works. So I think the fundamental thing is to have the kind of right target. Do we know the target's right? And then we'll aim for the target and get as close as we can to that particular target. I've got no idea what a target is. In the same way I said to you the other week, what's elite? I don't know what that means. So it's kind of, I think it's about understanding what is we're trying to aim for. And then I think your first question was about players coming through. So what do you put in place to give you the best possible chance of achieving the objective that you just said there? I don't know the answer to that question. One assumes whoever's at Lennoxtown knows exactly what the answer to that question is.
Oh, absolutely. It's not as though the policy of rearing youth isn't taken seriously at Celtic. I mean, there's a huge amount of a budget, pumped into Lennoxtown to try and create that. And I don't think anyone also, Jim, would argue that the facility that we provide is a lesser facility than it was prior to Lennoxtown. I think the facilities are incredible.
What you could also do is actually work back from things to say that why is there not more players in their team from the youth academy in the team just now, and work back from that. Is that something to do with the manager, something to do with the chief executive, something to do with the scouting, something to do with it, and keep going back until you get the answer to the question. My
concern with Karamoko is I remember him playing against Hearts, Jim, and anyone who remembers the game, I'm just going to say it, he roasted Aaron Hickey, roasted him. And you look at the development of Hickey, who's now gone over to Bologna. He was a signing target for Celtic. He had, of course, been released by Celtic without having played a game, like the aforementioned other 3 that created a bit of a frenzy on my Twitter page the other night. But Dembele hasn't progressed. Dembele has not developed or progressed since that day.
I'll say something. Hickey, I thought Hickey in the cup final was unbelievable. He he dug in, he was injured, he had a bit of cramp, and he kept playing, and he had a fantastic game in that cup final.
Yep.
And I thought, there's a really good player. And I watched him in the games against Celtic since, and he was awful. And I watched him against Rangers as well, and he was awful. And I couldn't see anything. Now, obviously, I'm not involved in the game. You're just a fan watching the game. But I couldn't see anything, certainly from a subjective point of view, that made Celtic want to go after him, or he's ended up in Italy as well. So what do I know about this stuff? But in terms of, there must be lots of data on Hickey that said, this is a guy worth pursuing. From an objective point of view. From a subjective point of view, I couldn't see it other than that one game. And that could have been a fluke. That could have been the one game he's had. But in the games I've seen since, I didn't think he was worth pursuing. I didn't think he was better than the players we had. And now he's in Italy, and obviously he'll move on to a different level. Because if you go to a major club and you're in their system all of a sudden, then you can't help but get better. Yeah, so.
Absolutely. No. David Bradley asks, where is Carlos now? I don't actually know. I mean, that story just came to mind as we were discussing it, so I'm going to have to check him out, maybe drop him a wee text, see how he's getting on. Mark, this is a good point. I like this, and this is certainly of an era that I appreciate. We live in a PlayStation generation. Ask any one of them what a multiplex is, and they'll say it's a cinema. I know what a multiplex is, Mark. Thanks for that. Love it. So we're going to have to also speak to Jim about the upcoming Hibs game as well, Jim. So let's have a wee look ahead. It's a tough game. I would guess it's going to be one of the toughest games that we're going to have, especially at this moment. I think after that we'll go into a run of games where we could really start racking up the points.
4 out of 5 at home, haven't they?
Yeah, they've got some good games coming up, if there is such a thing. And, you know, I'm looking at the game against Hibs. We discussed it yesterday with Stevie. There's a few things that obviously the manager will already have decided on, but we're looking at the goalkeeper situation with the goalie. Does Barkas come back in? Has Bain done enough to keep the jersey?
100% Barkas, yeah. Must be Barkas. I mean, this talk about signing this Man United reserve player who's on $100,000 a week, that's when you start thinking, stop the world, I want to get off if you're paying a reserve keeper $100,000 a week. That's never going to happen, basically. It'd be bizarre if that happened. Barkas, you need to start playing him every single game, even the European game. He's the number one, no question.
No, I would agree with that.
If you start messing about with them both, then both of their confidence is going to start to suffer. Barkas got injured, maybe that was a convenient excuse for maybe Neil to leave him out, but you have to bring him back in.
I totally agree, and I think what I've mentioned, it might be simplifying things quite a bit, is if we do get the Barkas situation resolved in terms of him, his confidence growing, him getting to know a settled backline, Jim.
I think
that's a massive problem we've got.
The unfortunate thing, Paul, is the fact that everyone's getting compared to Forster.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not about Barkas being a good goalkeeper. He's not as good as Forster was, because Forster could win games on his own. So you're right, I'm right, sorry. He's not as good as Forster. So he pales by comparison then. But he's a £4.5 million goalkeeper. He's an international goalkeeper as well. You play him all the time.
Totally agree with you. Barca boy, welcome back. It's good to hear from you again. 20-minute Tim's podcast. We've got 9 to 10 staff in sports science. The English clubs have 30. With more individual time, obviously, on the players. So it's an interesting one. That's still
quite a lot. I mean, I think you would expect us to have a fraction of what we have down south, given the money that's sloshing about down there. And there's a kind of balancing act here. You know, I was watching the Hearts programme. Did you see the Hearts programme last night?
I watched the first episode, Jim. I've not seen the second one yet.
The second episode, it's just when they have to stop the season mid-March type of thing, and it's, I don't know if it's the sports science guy from Hearts who's in the gym and he's trying to get the players doing bits and pieces. And I saw the Man City version of this, and the Man City version is like, you know, a cast of thousands doing this job as one guy was doing. So there's a balancing act there. You'd expect Celtic to have more guys than Hearts, but less guys than Man City. So maybe 9 or 10 sounds about right.
You know, it blows me away sometimes when you see the size of these clubs, you know, behind the scenes, Jim, beyond the 11 guys playing football on a pitch.
Yep.
And there's something we're involved in. It's a work in progress that will be launched, obviously, on A State of Mind. And I'm not going to give the game away, but it was kind of modelled on something I watched some time ago on Man City TV. So I was talking to somebody who's in the game, who's in the media game, who broke the news to me that Man City TV employs 75 people, and that's maybe why they can create something like this. And I thought, well, you know what, it's not going to stop us from giving it a go. But it's interesting to see the size of these clubs in comparison to to Celtic. Now, that takes us on to something that's completely removed from the thread at the moment, but the news, obviously, of the Atlantic League, Jim, and it looks as though Dermot Desmond isn't interested in pursuing that. What's your thoughts on that? Is that because there's something else in the mix?
I'm not aware of much information on this. If somebody had said, here's what they're thinking of doing, and we've knocked it back, and why we've knocked it back, I might understand it. It just seemed like kind of a bit of a headline, a bit of a kind of, we're not in. So give us a bit more information, Dermot. Tell us what is you've knocked back.
And why?
Because basically the club of the fans, it's not Dermot Desmond, it's not Peter Lawwell. So if you've knocked something back that could have been advantageous to the fans, it'd be good if you explained it to us in terms of what's actually happened. The Atlantic League sounded like a good idea. I think, as I said before, that if we're the biggest team in Scotland, then we should win all our games. If we're going to an Atlantic League and we're against whoever it is, Ajax or Sporting Lisbon, or whoever's going to be in that league, then we're playing against teams of a similar standing. And that's what we want to be. You want to play teams against a similar standing, because to beat them, that's an achievement. Is it much of an achievement beating Hamilton? No, really. Beating Ajax? Definitely. So it was very short in detail, and it just seemed like a kind of random headline.
It seemed out of place, didn't it?
Out of place.
At this time. Aye. Interesting. We were talking about gin earlier, Jim. I don't drink gin. I don't drink much. But I don't drink gin. But there's a lot of footballers getting on this gin thing, and Terry Tibbs has just given us the classic one, David Ginola. Would it not be great for Ginola to have a wee gin?
There you go.
That almost writes itself.
Boom, boom.
Fantastic. The other question is Shane Duffy. Does he return to the central defensive area?
Shane Duffy comes back. Reason being that Julian's hasn't kicked the ball for a while.
He was on the advert though.
Which is
looking good.
Which is the main thing. The big lad Doige up front for Hibs. Big up and up. Big typical centre forward. You put Duffy against him, he wins his individual battles. He does okay. I think we're almost 4 months into the season. I don't think we can keep saying, well, maybe drop this guy, drop that guy. Put your best team in the park and just play that team for the next few games. In terms of the team, Duffy has to, for me anyway, I know he's not been playing well, confidence low, come in and give us a really good game. Win your battles with the big guy Doige. Don't give him anything at all. You put Ayer alongside him, and you put El Hamid at the fullback and Laxalt at the fullback. And with your four defenders, you say, don't cross the halfway line. Or you say to your fullbacks, if one of them goes, one of them stays. Don't go mad with this. And I said, we talked about the Motherwell game. Laxalt was chasing down the goalkeeper after 2 minutes in the Motherwell game. Madness. Now, that raises another question. Has he been told to do that? And if he's been told to do that, that's quite a weird thing to do. Or if he's doing it off his own back, why hasn't somebody told him not to do that? It just seems a bit undisciplined, and that's what I said earlier about, it seems to be lots of players that are kind of doing their own thing. So I just think we need defenders. My formation would be 4-1-3-2. I'd have actually started up front first to say that, as I've bored people to death on this podcast, Lee Griffiths has to start every game for me. If he's not fit enough to last more than 45 minutes, then let's get 45 minutes out of him. He'll move people about, he'll create chances, he'll take shots from everywhere, he'll take brilliant set pieces. Eddie scored a couple of goals the other night, so he must be in a good frame of mind. Eddie and Griff.
State of mind.
State of mind.
Yep.
There you go. Boom, boom. I'm here all week, folks. So I'd play those two up front, definitely. Three in the middle. Christie, McGregor, I'd play further forward. And Elyounoussi. Elyounoussi is a bit of a risk, because he's a 9 out of 10 guy, 2 out of 10 guy. Last game was a 9 out of 10. So you're thinking, is this his 2 out of 10 game?
Yeah.
But we have to drop him after getting a hat-trick. But if he doesn't perform, you get rid of him at half-time. Hook him at half-time. Don't let him keep on. 5 subs. So Christie, McGregor further forward. Elyounoussi, Scott Brown. Don't cross the halfway line again. Just sit and protect that back four. If one goes forward, the other defender, the other full-back's going to tuck in. You've got 3 at the back. Scott sits in front of them. Just defend. Because if you get 5 up front of Christie, McGregor, Elyounoussi, Griffiths, Edward, nobody has to help them.
No, you're right.
Just give them the ball
and
let them deal with it. I'm pretty sure that's not the team Neil Lennon will put out. I think we'll be a bit more cautious than that. But in terms of a fan, what would I like to see? That's the team I'd like to see. I think they're all experienced guys. They know what's involved. Go for it. I mean, again, we're saying, well, Hibs is going to be a tough game. Celtic have got the best squad in the country. I don't think it's a tough game. It's a tougher game than other games. It's a tougher game in Hamilton away, say. But it's not a tough game. Not with that squad. Not with those players. Not if they go out and play to their potential. And I get the point about maybe there's not a lot of shape to the team. Maybe they're not that well coached. But you stick those 11 individuals on the park If you can't beat Hibs, you don't deserve to win the league, basically. Because, again, if we were to drop anything, then I think that's the end of the manager. But that's a whole different conversation.
We'll talk about that next Friday. Now, interestingly...
Hopefully not.
No, I didn't mean it like that. What I would like from you is a prediction, Jim. How are we going to do tomorrow?
I think we'll lose a goal 3-1.
3-1 Celtic. Griffiths on a score sheet.
Definitely. Yeah. If he plays.
Yeah, if he plays, then this is a question. I mean, to play a 2 up front, who knows? He's got some minutes in his legs.
I think it's really difficult coming off the bench getting 10-15 minutes. Mentally, I think that's really difficult.
He's done okay with it, I've got to say.
He's been brilliant.
Yeah.
He's been absolutely brilliant. Yeah. But it's almost like we'll bring on Lee to save them. I mean, Lee got us out of jail at St Johnstone. He got us back in the game at Aberdeen.
Mm-hmm.
What would he do from the start? Keep them moving about. I mean, Hibs, big guys at the back. Is it Ryan Porteous and who's the other guy? Hanlon, is it? Big guys at the back. If you play one up front, I think they'll take care of that one person up front. It's too much to do. Put 2 up front, keep them moving about, and with 3 guys like Christie, McGregor, Elyounoussi playing behind them, it's a team full of goals. Guys off the shot from distance.
So the defenders defend.
Defenders defend.
Yes.
And let's just try and take each game as cliche time. Take each game as it comes. We've won the game on Saturday. We've got a League Cup game next week. You try some other players out. The European game on Thursday. Try some players out, and then we've got 4 out of 5 home games in December, as well as the Scottish Cup. Although we've actually been better away than we've been at home. Anyway, we should be beating teams, and we get 4 games out of 5. It's Livingston, I think, is the only away game in the plastic pitch. So let's put a wee run together and let's get back into it and let's be a bit more optimistic and positive about the whole thing.
It's been a positive podcast, Jim. I've got to say now, Gordon, who's talking about gin, so straight away, there you go. Nobody said John McGinn, the John McGinn. Brilliant, like it. Joe Porter thinks 3-0 Celtic, whereas Mark Tallier thinks 2-1 Celtic. Mr. Briggs reckons 2-0 to the boys. So it does look as though we're in positive spirits going into this game. Spirits, you like that? We're just in positive spirits going into the game.
But what I will today. This is great.
Go far, I know. But what I will do is remind everybody there's a wee ticker tape at the bottom of your page, and there is an email address of Kelly, who is dealing with the promotional side of a Celtic State of Mind. If you want to be a sponsor at some point during the quadruple treble charity weekend, easy for me to say, then please get in touch with Kelly at stateofmind.media. Kelly will deal with all your inquiries, every single inquiry. Do you want to be on the show? Hopefully by then you'll be allowed to travel. So basically, here's the details. Here's the deal. 19th and the 20th of December, we watched the Celtic Christmas ad this morning and we thought, what are we going to do for Christmas? What's a Celtic State of Mind going to do for Christmas? And it has been one of the hardest years that many of us will ever face in our lives. Let's do something. And we're going to do it around the quadruple treble weekend, and let's hope we do win that because it'll make it even better. We're going to do 24 hours of a broadcast split into 2 12-hour slots to raise funds for charity. What charities will we be giving the money to? Well, the specific charities are to be confirmed, and again, email Kelly if you want to get involved in that side of things. Do you have a small community charity that perhaps supports mental health, homelessness, vulnerable kids, vulnerable adults? Get in touch. We want to raise as much cash as possible. We have a figure in mind. We're not going to announce that just yet. We've been giving you free content all year. We're going to continue. It's always going to be free. But we're going to ask for something back on that weekend, and we're going to try and raise as much as we can for the needy at Christmas time, Jim. We're going to have ex-players, pundits, prominent fans, musicians, and anybody else who wants to get involved will be able to. We've got 24 hours to fill, Jim. It just won't be you and me, that's for sure. There'll be plenty of broadcasts, plenty of quirky shows, and insight from those who know a lot more about football than Paul John Dykes and Jim Orr. But thank you everybody for getting involved. Please email Kelly at stateofmind.media if you want to get involved in any way for the charity weekend. Thanks everybody for getting involved. But the last thing I would like to say before he gives me a guitar lesson is thank you, Jim Orr, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers, Paul.